Buying a property for investment is different to buying a home to live in, and today we're going to run through some of the ways you will need to think differently to an owner-occupier if you choose to go down their rent investing path.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today, we're talking about rent vesting and the things you'll need to think about before you decide to go down this path.
But before we get into that, what is your special house this week, Megan? It's not really a house. And if anyone's not watching the video, there's a video behind
There's
Megan.
a picture. This is not rent quality.
We're not excited about this.
No,
This
is just a housing estate with a whole lot of houses, no trees to be seen, all the same, black roofs. This is not investment grade. Okay, so we're talking about rent vesting today. You have to have a really different mindset to an owner-occupier. You want to be looking for investment grade. We're not talking about what investment grade is today, but this is not investment grade.
No. So don't be thinking you're going to rush off and buy a house and land package or a brand new apartment if you're going to rent vest instead of buying a home to live in. All right. For some first home buyers, rent vesting is really their only option to get into the property market. We accept that, right? But however, for others, there's like a fork in the road, where they could decide to either take the plunge now as an investor or wait until they're in a position to buy a home to live in. And I guess in a way, this episode is really particularly dedicated to them because there are quite a lot of different ways that you need to think. And so that's what this is about, is showing you the differences and what you need to be considering that an owner-occupier may not even need to think about.
Absolutely. And this is not advice to go one way or the other. Let's be really clear about this. Again, this podcast is always about giving you information for you to then go away to your team and work out whether it's the right thing for you. So it's just giving you options to then investigate for your own personal circumstances. But buying a property as an investment, it does take a really different mindset to choosing a home to live in because that's such an emotional journey. You're really imagining, if you're a couple, you're imagining what would be like to have a baby in the home. If you're, a family, you're imagining, can I see the children from the kitchen and how are we going to live in this property and where are the beds going to be situated? There's so many more emotional aspects to buying a home.
If you're not a family or not thinking of becoming a family, you're just thinking about the dinner parties you can hold in that dining room,
Will the large dining table fit on the balcony in this apartment? Absolutely, But there's a lot of things you need to consider. And first and foremost is, what is your goal? Why are you doing this?
And this is a really big one because a lot of people who rent vest, they say, well, my goal is to get into the market. I just want to get into the market. Now, it might only do that. And it might do nothing else. And we're always recommending that you think with a long-term lens. Getting into the market is not enough unless you've thought beyond what you do once you get into the market. So, do you want to build a portfolio? Is that what this is about? You're thinking this is the first of many, or is it that you really just want to buy an investment and you want to set and forget it? And you just, you retire in 30, 40 years time, you go, oh, I'm so glad I bought that.
I've got that
apartment
income
or house
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And it's all paid off and I've used the equity over the years and it's been a great giver for me and it's really helped set me up financially. Are you someone who's a renovator? You actually want to be really active, an active investor and want to actually renovate and improve a property, or you're just not sure?
Yeah, and this is danger zone, right? Because I think the first one and the last one is it's simply to get into the market. That's a fear of missing out kind of strategy, and not being sure why you're buying or thinking that you buy an investment property is equally as dangerous because you don't really know why you're doing it. Then why spend so much time, money, and effort to do something that you don't know what your goal is? What is it? What is your goal? Why are you doing it? What are you trying to achieve? What's your time frame? Things change in life, but you should really have a strategy around property and property investment.
Yeah. Now, we will in future weeks, we've actually got a couple of episodes coming up with some experts around some of the more financial side of rent vesting, and these things are really
You're
important.
excited for these conversations.
Yeah, I am too, actually.
Because
They're really
the conversations
valuable.
that we always go, okay, well, you'll need to talk to your accountant about this, or you'll need to talk to your mortgage broker. We're going to actually have these conversations with the people who can really give us some good advice.
We are indeed. And in fact, some of the things that we're going to be talking about in those episodes, a little bit as we go through this one, is that rent vesting can be great for some people, but it can be a trap for others. And this is why you really need to be very careful about understanding what your goals are, because if you don't actually set those goals and understand the implications one way or the other, you could actually find yourself trapped, and it has not served you at all to go down the rent vesting path. So that's why we want you to be really clear. That's the first one. And the second one, which is sort of linked to the goals, and Megan just mentioned it in a way, was what's your time frame? Do you intend this property to be an investment forever? It's a long term, and we always recommend you do. Or is this going to be a stepping stone? Are you thinking that, this will just be for me to get in the market so then I can actually use this to buy the home? Yeah.
Now, okay, let's just do a little caution in here, Veronica, little red flag. Rent vesting is really different to the stepping stone strategy.
Yeah.
And everybody who's listened to us knows that stepping stone strategy is a really valid way to have a long-term view of how you can start with a smaller property and stepping stone your way, or step through into the dream home in the future. And it's a really good strategy. It is a long-term strategy that needs a very good structured approach to how you're going to do it, what your asset selection. So this is not stepping stone. This is rent vesting. Which is, of course, we always recommend a very long-term lens when it comes to investing.
We do, because the thing is that a lot of people, I think, are mistakenly getting the two confused. They're thinking that rent vesting is their stepping stone. And we really want you to understand that sometimes rent vesting is a path that some people are committing to investing forever and not actually buying a home. And that's something to be aware of. And it's different for everybody. And we'll go into that in the future episodes, particularly with on the borrowing one. Yeah. But just be very, very careful about that, because they're two very different strategies. Right. The third thing on our list
is purchasing costs. So it's important to know that when you buy as an investor versus a principal place of residence, and particularly a first home buyer principal place of residence, there are certain things that are going to be treated differently. So generally speaking, in most states, there aren't concessions on transfer or stamp duty for investors. So whilst you may, as a first home buyer buying a principal place of residence, depending on the property price and a number of other factors which are different in every state, you might get concessions, even a full concession of stamp duty in some states, depending on the property that you buy. You won't get those concessions. So there's no government rebates or incentives or concessions available to investors.
Yes. And then obviously the federal government's home loan deposit guarantee scheme. Again, I can never remember the updated name of that, but that's where the government, will let you buy with a 5% deposit and then you don't have to pay LMI because they pay it for you effectively. That's not available for investors either. So you're sort of foregoing those, and we're not recommending that you use those incentives to define your approach to what you buy either. Okay, that's a separate issue. But if you are foregoing those, so you will have to then save up a proper deposit, a full deposit, whether or not you pay LMI or how that works. You're going to have to pay the deposit. You're going to have to pay the stamp duty and the other purchasing costs. So that's just something that as a rent investor you have to be prepared for.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got running costs. This is number 4 on our things to consider if you are thinking of rent vesting. You're probably going to be cash flow negative for at least the first few years. And you've got to really think about, can you afford this? So actually doing your financial modelling and getting it checked to make sure that you have thought about all of the potential costs. You've got a good buffer. You're ready for maintenance when it comes up. You can deal with an interest rate rise or several. These are all things that eat into your running costs. And of course, when you're looking for a property that is investment grade, you're looking for something that is going to appreciate in value, to increase in value over time. And the more of your money that you spend on the asset, the land component of the asset, the less you'll get in terms of rent. I just completely stuffed that up.
Yeah,
I'm going to re-say that again. And you don't need to cut this out.
Edit. Are you going to cut it out or are you going to leave it there?
You can leave it in if you like.
All
That's one of
right.
those bloopers you get to see. Okay, so
Let's do it again.
I'm going to restate that a little bit more. Generally speaking, you're going to be cash flow negative when you buy an investment property that is investment grade, not investor stock. Investment grade meaning that you're paying more for the land, the appreciating part of the asset, than you are for the improvements that you get rent from.
Yeah, that actually opens up a whole Pandora's box. In some cities, like in Sydney, it's a very expensive city and you can actually do very well buying apartments. But again, you want an element of land value, and land is more valuable in more valuable suburbs, and even an apartment in a valuable suburb, if it's a good block and et cetera, all these caveats, has land content that you're paying for. Whereas in a lot of other cities, we're really talking about aiming for buying a house versus an apartment, or a townhouse versus an apartment, et cetera, et cetera. So these are general principles that will differ slightly depending on which market that you're looking at buying in. But the point being, though, that if you are buying a house on a big block of land, then tenants don't tend to pay for the size of the land. They pay for the house that they're renting, whether it's renovated or not, how many bedrooms it's got, all that sort of stuff. So that's why you don't really get rent for the land, you get rent for the house. Now, the thing too is that rents will go up and down. And whilst we've been in a situation in recent years when rents have been rising, prior to COVID, there was a period of time when rents were falling.
Absolutely.
So rents won't always be rising. And so you've got to you've got to recognise that you might be out of pocket. It's highly likely you're going to be out of pocket at different times. And that's why it's so important to actually buy a property that goes up in value, but we'll get to that in a minute. But maintenance, property management, insurance, rates, etc., all of those things, they can now cost up to 35% of the rental income. And then you got to pay the mortgage on top of that. So this is something you've got to be really, really aware of when you're becoming a property investor.
Yeah, and that's sort of gone up in the last, I'd say about 8 years too,
Yeah,
because our
it
benchmark
has.
for property management used to be about 23% of rent
Exactly. Same with
would
us.
be, put aside for everything except mortgage repayments.
This is since COVID, really, that has gone up so
cost of
steeply.
insurance has gone up, maintenance trades have gone up, property management fees have not gone up. They've actually there's been a bit of a squeeze on property management fees. But certainly those other costs have increased, and you need to be able to cover those out of your pocket, out of your income, out of your disposal income, if there are any changes to it. And of course, the big one being mortgage repayments. If there are any changes to interest rates that aren't in your favour, they're going up. You really need to have that in mind to be able to cover. Now, you need that if you're an owner-occupier. It's just a general property principle to have those sorts of buffers. But the rental side of things is the thing that can be a little bit more volatile. Rents can go up. They can also go down too, as you said.
Now, a really big mistake that particularly, and rent investors can make this mistake, a lot of investors make this mistake, is when they chase yield, and that is they chase higher rents to ease cash flow, but they chase those higher rents at the expense of capital growth. Now, most first home buyers who are choosing to rent invest rather than buy their own home to live in have got a long runway before they retire, decades. Over those decades, compounding is your friend. Capital growth is really why you want to invest in property. You don't want to invest in property for income, because that leads to number 5 thing to consider is that rent won't make you rich.
I do see, I see a lot on social media at the moment from organisations who are saying, you can build a $150,000 passive income through investing in property. You've got to be really careful and really dig below some of these claims, because you're not going to be achieving that with one rent vesting, two rent vesting. You got to be really careful, dig down, understand what sits below those sorts of claims, and see if that's actually a viable strategy for you. Because if you need, I don't know, 8 properties to achieve that, and they have to be cash flow positive, and therefore you're sacrificing capital growth in the asset selection, then you might actually find that you hit a borrowing capacity limit that doesn't actually allow you to achieve that kind of level of borrowing for those sorts of properties. So, really don't get caught up in the whole passive income, quickly through property, retire early. I think they call it FIRE.
That's different.
Something. But
They're frugal.
Don't get caught up in that. This is about making really good, sensible investment decisions with a steady head and removing some of those emotions. Rent, as you say, this is number 5. Rent doesn't make you rich, and it doesn't compound. So if you go back to some of our earlier podcasts where we've talked about what the magic of compounding with property investment is, that your property might be worth $100,000 in year 1, and if it goes up by 5%, it's worth $105,000, and then if it goes up in 5%, that's 5% of $105,000, not $100,000. That's the compounding nature. So that growth on growth on growth is why people can do quite well out of well-located investment grade properties.
Yeah,
you do have to pay tax on it.
Yeah, exactly. Every time you get the income, you then have to pay tax.
It goes into your assessable income.
Yeah. So number 6, though, capital growth will make you rich, right? Capital growth means that the value of the property is compounding over time. And here's the thing I particularly love, right? If you buy a good asset that goes up over time, it's not going to go up the same amount every year. Right, it will go up and down. There will be fluctuations in growth, and that's just the way.
And there might be some negative years.
There will be,
but it's an on-paper negative growth. Yeah,
that's it. And also, it's an on-paper growth as well. And this is where it's pretty cool, because you only have to pay tax on that growth when you sell. One day in the future, right, you will have to pay tax on your gains, right? But that actually means that in the meantime, particularly if you're younger and you've got decades before you retire, and you might not even have to sell this when you retire anyway. So, but between now and the decades in the future when you sell this thing, you're effectively reinvesting your tax liability every year in the meantime. So you get to compound your tax bill that goes unpaid until you actually sell it. That's pretty powerful.
It's delaying it, but it's. I've sometimes heard that myth that why would you have a property that you're just going to pay tax on at the end? It's like, well, because the tax is a small part of the overall gain that you get from capital growth. You have to pay for it somewhere.
It's so funny. I mean, bring it on. I want to pay $1 million in tax one year. Right? I really do.
How good would that be?
That's
How much
my
are you
life
earning
goal.
if that's your tax bill?
Exactly.
Seriously, don't complain about it, because you've developed yourself into a point where you're earning enough money that's the kind of tax you pay. Well done.
How good.
Yeah.
Not yet, guys. Not yet.
No.
I have to sell a few more of these courses. All right. It is so much more important, right, that you buy an A-grade property as an investor than it is if you're an owner-occupier. You can make compromises as an owner-occupier, and people do, because they need to be in a certain location, or they need a certain amount of size, or they need, whatever it is. as an owner occupier, you sort of make with your eyes open. You know, we teach you about what A, B, and C grade properties are like. Try to get you to avoid C at all costs. But as an owner occupier, you can make a case for why a B grade will suit you and will suit you for a long period of time. But with an investor,
But knowing which compromises are right as an owner
that's
occupier.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
As an investor, though, you don't have to compromise. You find the best possible asset that you can buy for your money.
Definitely. And the secret to capital growth are that it actually has got owner-occupier appeal. Now, this is the irony. We're telling you need to think and have a different mindset as an investor, but you actually have to think like an owner-occupier as well.
Yes.
But not as yourself, right? You have to think about the kind of demographic of the person who would buy in that location, in that kind of price range, with those sorts of features. You have to think like that kind of owner-occupier appeal.
Because the thing is, if you buy a property that only investors are interested in, think about it. No one's going to get emotional. No one's going to fight for it. No one's going to push the price up. No one's going to compete for it. You want somebody to compete for that property one day in the future when you go to sell that. So that's the type of owner-occupier you'll be thinking of.
Yeah. And it also makes sure that you've got broad appeal in the future. So you've got a multifaceted buyer pool, like owner-occupiers, investors, whatever the case may be. If you're
Could be
just focused on
first-home buyers.
investment grade, then you're missing a big part of the market. And that's who's going to pay a premium for your property in the future.
Exactly. You want people in different phases of life to want to live in that properties, not just as tenants, but as owner occupiers. And that's what Megan's talking about there. So you could have a downsizer could want it, a single person might want it, a couple might want it, somebody with a baby might want it. You know, as long as it's just that you could see that it could
A
suit
few different buyer
many
pools.
different types. Yeah.
And this is why we are so, we just continuously tell you to be very cautious about house and land packages, because house and land packages are attractive to first home buyers and investors because there's tax benefits for investors and there's also grants and incentives that can apply to different price ranges, obviously, but for first home buyers. So it's a very, very limited resale pool. Once that property ages to a certain point, then it loses its investor appeal as well. So
Because the next lot of investors don't get the same tax benefits for buying it secondhand as they would if they bought it new.
and the first home buyers don't get anything. So it's unattractive to them. So that's where your buyer pool for a house and land package, a new house and land package, your future buyer pool, so your capital growth potential is quite limited. And in some cases, negative growth.
And it can take years before that sort of comes back to any sense of normality. And the other thing to really think about when you're looking at capital growth is scarcity. You know, even if, like, for example, and I don't rule out all apartments, and I know some property people will say you never buy an apartment, but as I said, it's case by case, location by location. But here's an example. You might have an area where there's lots of apartment buildings, but not all apartment buildings are really nice. Not all apartment buildings are well designed. Not all apartment buildings are well built. Not all apartment buildings are well maintained. So if you can sort of sort through to find a really good building in amongst all of that, and then within that really good building, not all apartments are going to face north. Not all apartments are going to be higher than ground level. Not all, you know what I mean? So it's a matter of finding the best one. So even when you got a situation where you might think, well, there's no scarcity in this suburb, there's lots of houses, or there's no scarcity in this area, there's lots of apartments. It's like, what is scarce is the apartment or the house with those characteristics that buyers love and that not enough of those properties have. That's what we're talking about with scarcity as well. There's a lack of, we don't want to see lots and lots of endless supply to compete with it.
And what you might find if your budget can stretch to it is what can be quite scarce is 3-bedroom apartments when there is a proliferation of 2-bedroom apartments. So 2-bedroom apartments can be cheaper and easier to buy because there's so many of them. But it is actually, in a lot of cases, harder to find those bigger 3-bedroom apartments in amongst, and often they're in older complexes, not the newer ones, because the developers, generally speaking, when they do their numbers, they're going to get more margin out of a higher number of 2-bedrooms than they're going to get out of a smaller number of 3-bedroom apartments. So that's how developers work out what they're going to create is what margin are we going to get? Can we get people to buy these? And is it going to be the most profitable way to use this piece of land and get the most out of this piece of land?
100%. Now, the seventh thing on the list here is location overwhelm. If you're going to be a rent investor, then all of a sudden, when you're an owner occupier, you know where you want to live and you know where the commute is to work and to the places that you want to spend time on the weekend or where your friends are, your family. With an investor, you literally got 15,000 or 13,000 or something suburbs across the whole country to choose from, right? You can get absolute
It can be overwhelming, can't it? Yes.
And look, we do have a little investor tutorial that you can buy that sort of helps you narrow down and gives you a process to filter through to get to a short list there. But that is one of the problems with investing. You think that's difficult to be as a first time buyer, and all of a sudden you think, all right, now I can buy anywhere in Australia. What the hell am I going to do? And it's not a dart.
Like, you don't get a dartboard out and throw it at the map. That's not the way to and it's not buying close to home. So that doesn't necessarily get you the right investment location.
That's the thing. So there's a thing called home bias, right? That's, I buy where I know because it feels safe and I can drive past it
and see it. Yeah.
But there are some merits in that as well. There's some merits in actually having a familiarity with the area and actually being able to access a property that you own and making sure you can check that your property manager's on it and all that sort of stuff. There are some merits to that, but that's sort of not what it's all about. The reality is with rent vesting, if you're a pure rent investor, it's that you should be agnostic to location. You should really literally be looking for a great location. Now, the problem is there is a lot of noise out there around where you should be investing. And at the moment,
it's the most asked question.
Well, it is. Where should I invest? And that's why we did create that tutorial, a number of years ago. It's actually funny because I was just reviewing the tutorial, Megan, and today we'll say that look, the hot markets in Australia are Perth and Brisbane and Adelaide, and back then it was Hobart. No one would think of Hobart as a hot market now. It's been in the doldrums.
Hobart's really coming off, actually.
Really? Yeah, it's been down for
had its run.
But it was
not recommending that, by the way.
Gangbusters. No, but what it does do, it's really good because it just does remind us that what goes up can come down.
Absolutely.
And it's about understanding that you've got to understand what the fundamentals are in a location, and then do a lot more research in terms of what's important for long-term growth when you choose a location. And then you've actually got to be able to choose a good asset within that location. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that goes into choosing an A-grade asset, and you can absolutely 100% get location overwhelm and either do nothing or throw a dart and make a huge mistake.
I think I just want to pick up on that point that you just made, and that is choosing a general location is just a very small part of the story. So it's not just about saying, all right, well, I'm going to invest in Kedron, for example, in Brisbane, because there's 4 pockets of that particular suburb, and in one pocket is a very different price to another pocket, is a very different price to the pocket that has a huge amount of flood and overland flow impact and borders onto a lower socioeconomic suburb. So you actually need to then get right down. It's not just which suburb am I going to invest in, it's understanding, getting your feet on the ground, really having some intimate knowledge of an area, which streets, which side of the streets, which elevation. In a hilly location, you really need to make sure that it's not just the street that you're getting right, but you're actually getting the position in the street right. Otherwise, you could suffer quite badly from some future impact on capital growth. So you got big picture, and then you got to come right down to that micro level.
That location knowledge is critical because a lot of people do great research that gets them to a suburb, and they completely undo it by not understanding how to choose a good asset in that suburb. And this is the problem. It sort of goes back to that home bias. At least if you are buying in your own city, you are able to go and do all that research yourself. Whereas if you're buying in a city that is another state or even a couple of hour drive away, then that does increase your challenges, I guess, when it comes to researching and really coming to grips with that local knowledge. And here's the thing too, you can, a lot of people do engage a buyer's agent to do that, but don't go and engage a buyer's agent that's not a local either, because I'm horrified by the amount of
times they're just doing the desk-based research.
And they don't even go and inspect the properties. They don't even go to the areas. And the sales agents are sort of laughing behind their back about how easy it is to sell to these, sell garbage to these people overpriced. So be very, very careful about being, as I said, as a rent investor, you've got to be agnostic about location, but then you've got to put in checks and balances to make sure that you're not making enormous mistakes because you don't know enough about where you're investing in.
Yep. And that leads us on to the eighth thing you need to consider, and that's danger zones. There are so many opinions about where to invest. So many people talking about chasing the next big thing, the next hot spot. That makes my skin crawl, that word.
Yep.
It isn't, investing isn't about hot spots. It's about long-term investment fundamentals, looking for key indicators, and what works in one location is not going to work in another location. We often, almost joke that you can buy an apartment in certain suburbs in Sydney and expect not to have off-street parking. But you would never buy an apartment in any Brisbane suburb that didn't have an allocated car space, off street. So you've got to make sure that you understand what works in the area that you're buying in once you've worked out the location. You don't just have a formula and say, I want this, 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 and this, and I'll either buy it in that suburb, or that suburb, because what the drivers for growth in each of those suburbs might be completely different. The demographic might be completely different. An apartment in a certain family-oriented suburb where it's mainly houses and bigger blocks of land, that's probably not going to do particularly well. But an apartment in an area where it's highly sought after and it's very hard to get into, and it's a really good apartment complex with very few on a good block of land, that could potentially be a good investment. So you've got to make sure you understand the intricacies of the areas and the property type that's going to suit the demographic of the tenant and the future buyer.
Yeah, 100%. And you need to have that long-term view. As Megan was saying, the hot spotting is so short-term. And yeah, you might get a sugar hit of a immediate, growth in value. But then if that area does not have those long-term fundamentals, that sugar hit's not going to last you the length of the time you need to be owning this property, right? So you really need to focus on the best possible asset you can afford, get a great property manager, and let time work its magic. And so if you choose rent investing, got to have that long-term view, got to get your goals right, go through those 8 things to think about. And I'm
going to add one there, Veronica.
We talk about things.
We talk about the long-term lens. There is so much work that goes into choosing the right asset up front, and then the rest of it can be very boring.
Oh, yes.
And that's okay.
Make friends with boredom.
It's not exciting to own a good quality investment property.
How good is it though? Not exciting. Good. Don't want that sort of drama, thanks.
You don't.
Now, if you're getting started on your property buying journey and you want to work through the options of rent vesting versus buying a home to live in, then we mentioned earlier the Where to Invest tutorial. We've actually got a Kickstart package where we bundle in 3 tutorials into one for $99, right? And those 3 tutorials are the Where to Invest. There's also the Where to Buy. So that's coming at it from an owner-occupier point of view. And then there's the Stepping Stone Strategy tutorial. 3 really important concepts to work through and get your head clear if you are at that stage where you're the fork in the road and you're trying to work out what should I be doing at this point, so that you might find that Kickstart package really helpful. You can get the link in the show notes.
Yeah, and in coming episodes, we'll be interviewing a mortgage broker and property planner, David Johnson. We've actually had him on previously, but we're going to talk to him about uncovering some of the financing pitfalls of rent vesting before buying a home to live in. And look, you really need to consider this, because I think it's an unanticipated consequence that people face down the track if they haven't done their planning properly. We've also got an episode coming up with accountant Catherine Simon, who will take us through the tax implications of each option.
Now, both of these financial aspects are really critical to making good decisions around investing. So make sure you keep an ear out for these episodes. They will be in the next couple of weeks, and then probably in a month we would have covered off all 3 of these episodes.
Yeah. Now, have you joined our Facebook group yet, it's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions. You'll get answers from us. Sometimes they're posted by Jules, who is part of our team, but they are from us, which means you can be sure you're not getting led down the garden path.
Yeah, we ban amateurs from answering on our Facebook group. No amateur answers. So you only get the good stuff. Look, a quick note. You might think I should say that we cover everything you need to know in this podcast, even this episode, which is really quite detailed in terms of things you need to consider. There's still more, right? There's still more. And so, we're just scratching the surface. We're wanting to raise your awareness of the things that you need to be thinking about. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
Yeah, absolutely. Our First Home Buyer Guide course only costs $990 and you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations. I had 5 people in Campfire today. Each one of them is on a property right now. And we talked through elements of those properties, elements of the negotiation, elements of auction presentation, questions to us as strata managers, all sorts of really in-depth things, very specific things specific to those people. But each of those people learnt something from the questions that the other people asked. It's such a good community, and we're able to put them on the right path. So within Campfire, you can share the link of any property you're thinking of buying, and we can help you work through whether it's A, B or C grade, or if it's a home to live in, work through your compromises. And that's one of the conversations I had today with one of our students was, is this really the right set of compromises for you? And I've sent them away to really look deeply into that. Trust me, you'll buy better with our guidance and you'll overpay by a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
And that is such good guidance, Megan, about are you sort of making the right choices before you sign on the dotted line? Because the amount of people that I meet are in time, and you'll be the same, that actually regret that first purchase. They made a mistake. They did it for all the wrong reasons or they just didn't think it through or whatever. Yeah. And then they very quickly work it out though, pretty much within the first month or two, and then you're stuck with it. So we're here to prevent you from doing that.
Absolutely.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out Your First Home Buyer Guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.